Good morning, Code Baker. Today we're going to add the friend score to the lower left-hand corner of the game screen. This is a Flutter overlay. Currently there's a small icon for a girl that is a friend. The icon is from the Mod Interiors pack by LimeZoo. This is the same author as the tile set that we're using in this game. For the purpose of the tutorial, we could select the free option, no thanks, or you could, it's up to you, you could pay as well. The Modern Interior pack does come with some characters, and I think that LimeZoo did use this character in the example tile sheet that he supplied. We're going to use Amelia as a non-moving icon. Let's open her up in GIMP or some other image editor. We're just going to cut out that one cell to make it simpler. These icons are pretty small, so you might want to enlarge it on GIMP, just the view portion. And then use the rectangular select tool to copy it. So I'm using Control C, and then create new from clipboard, and you have this one small little icon here. Then export this as a PNG into the assets/images folder of your game project. Just call it friend.png. Make sure you run flutter pub get after you add the image in, and just confirm that the pubspec.yaml file has assets/images in there. Above the onload method, let's set up an integer value for the number of friends. Initially, he'll have no friends, but that's just because he moved into the town of Happy Bay Village, and he doesn't know anyone yet. So the purpose of the game is for him to get to know more people from the town. Thanks to CodeBaker1, I found an error in the tutorial. So your code might look a little bit different here. You're not passing it the game variable yet at this stage. In the stateless widget, under the build method, you have to insert a column here. So if you right click on row, or just click on it, you can wrap with a column. Where is it? Wrap with column. I've already wrapped it, and then set the main axis alignment to main axis alignment dot spaced between. And that's because we have two rows here. The button controller is a Flutter overlay, and we're going to also put a row here that has the friend number. At the bottom in the lower left-hand side of the screen, there is the friend number. It has small black text, so it may be a little difficult to see it, but it is there. I'm going to wrap it in padding to push it up a little bit from the bottom and also in from the edge. I'm going to increase the text size. So this is a text widget here, and it's being passed a string. So after the string, we can put a comma, a style property, and pass it a text style widget. And one of the properties of the text style widget is the font size, which you can now bump up to 30. And it's pretty big and bold. I'm going to set it to font size of 28 and then cut down that blackness of the color. It's a little bit too intense. So there's a color property, and we can pass it the material colors.black, and I'll set it to black 45 here. It's more subdued. It doesn't really distract as much from the gameplay at this tone and color. We're not going to use the friend number piece of text. What we'll do is we'll use the friend icon. So that icon we just cut out with GIMP in the previous step. And the way to put it in is a image widget with a capital I, asset for the name constructor, and then we're going to have it run asset/images, and it's the name of the file, friend.png. And now we have a super small icon in the lower left-hand side. I'm going to set the scale to 0.8, which actually increases the size. I'm not sure why. I don't quite understand why the smaller the scale is, the bigger the character comes. I guess I should read up about this, but you can play around the scale number to get the proper character size. And the friend icon and the piece of text are a bit too close together, so I'm going to sort of size the box as a spacer with a width. Probably 20 is maybe too much, but maybe 12 might be a bit better. Yeah, that looks pretty good. At the top of the overlay, we have two icon buttons from Flutter as well as a piece of text. At the bottom of the overlay, we now have a graphic made from image.asset as well as an integer that has been converted to a string. As we start populating our game with more characters and more conditions, we're probably going to need to organize the code a bit. So I'm going to create a subfolder called characters to store the friend and the primary character George. Initially, George is a very simple sprite animation class without too much interactivity. We didn't put his movement inside of the class that we created. So it's pretty simple right now, but let's get the process started. Create a new file, George_component, and then just cut the simple class that we had in the previous file into the new file, George_component. We're going to need to import the Flame and I think it's just Flame that we're using right now. The spray animation component is in the Flame/component, and the hitbox. So this one has collision detection. It's in geometry.dart. So the first import is flame/components.dart. And the second one, we'll use control dot. It did find it this time. It's geometry.dart, flame/geometry.dart. Back in the main.dart file, we need to import the new file that we just created with the class for George component. So in addition to George, we're going to use a friend component. So remember that at the current time, our friend component does not contain the sprite. This is just a position component without any graphics. We're only using it for the bounding boxes because of the way that our map was generated at this stage. However, there is some logic for the collision that we did put into the friend component class. So let's break it out into a separate file, so that it's not just all in our main.dart. Remember that at this stage, the friend component is only the bounding box. Right now it's purple because we have debug mode turned on to true just for the tutorial. The main.dart file must import the two new files that you just created. As the objective for the entire game is for George to increase the number of friends that he makes in the new town of Happy Bay Village, I'm going to put the friend number in the FlameGame as an integer variable. Modify the friend component so that it accepts a variable game. In the main.dart file, modify the friend instantiation so that it accepts the game instantiated object, which would be this from within the FlameGame. When the collision takes place, we'll first increment the integer friend number variable by 1, so that's a shortcut ++. Then we will notify the listeners of the overlay. And just a warning that I am getting that blue squiggly line, which is a warning that I may be using that notify listeners incorrectly. I need to go on to the Flame forum or the Discord and ask more about that. But it does seem to work, right? So when you have the collision with the character, it does appear to actually trigger the integer increments, and then the overlay is updated. One problem with the gameplay is that I'm triggering the action at collision end. So it's when the character actually hits the friend and then leaves the friend. So if you're move the George character right on the friend and there's a collision, the action is not going to take place until he moves off. So there's this other method we're going to change it to, which is just on collision. The reason I didn't use this in the beginning is that when he collides, he's going to keep on colliding. However, we did insert this remove the bounding box. So we're removing the actual collision point on first collision. So he's only going to collide once. It does accept vector2 parameter. That was a typo. So now George, he'll get a new friend right when he meets the new friend. So as soon as the collision takes place, and there only should be one collision per friend. So the collision's working a bit better. George is making friends. At this point, we could add some baked goods like cookies or a pie onto the game screen. We could also add a audio cue when he meets a friend, maybe some type of party sound effect. But I think right now I'm just going to make the background music play. So at the top, we do have these very light icons, intentionally light, to turn on the music and mute it. But I'll set it to play automatically at the time of when the game starts. We have a text string at the top to indicate what track we're playing. This one's called ukulele. We could change the track also in the future. So I'm probably going to add more features to this game series, and would like some comments if people want to see different techniques if we continue forward with this particular series. As the series gets more complex, we're going to have to use increasingly more techniques to make the code, where the code is, easier to find for ourselves. So I'm going to take out the update method from the main FlameGame update. I'm going to put the update method for George's movement into the George component. Even if you're working by yourself, when you're, as the code gets more complex, it actually becomes more and more difficult to find your own code. The problem is a lot worse if you're working in a team of people, like you're collaborating in GitHub. So there's a fair bit of effort that's going to be required to organize your code. It's much easier just to drop it into main.dart initially, but we're going to try to break it up. One of the techniques is that the position components, they have this update method. It's for the component specific update method. So we're going to change the movement of George from the FlameGame update method to this smaller portion, which is the George component update method. So again, every position component, whether it's a sprite or a sprite animation component or an extension of a sprite animation component, has an update method. So you can handle the actions within the update method. There's also a render method here too. So we're going to change all of it so that it's specific to this one character. This is a very simple organization of the files. It's not the best practice. You might want to use a more common method such as a model view controller. However, at least we are encapsulating some of the functionality of the George component into George. I'm going to keep some of the information like the direction variable within the FlameGame. I think it's probably easier to see it. We can think about what to leave in FlameGame and what to put in George. One of the objectives is so that we can find the code ourselves in the future. So we'll start off by passing the George component the entire game, FlameGame, so that if we pass it the entire game, we can access any of the variables or methods from the FlameGame. At this stage, I'm going to leave the onTap up method in the FlameGame itself. I think it's probably easier to find because people generally go to main.dart. But within the George component, we can then grab the direction from the game itself, right? So there's a variable for the direction. We're setting up with an integer. Normally, you probably use a string or a enum, which would be the strings after that. So at this stage, don't put the word game in front of the animations, like the right animation, the left animation. We're going to actually cut and paste the animations from main.dart into the George component. I'm next going to move the animations which are specific to the George sprite animation component, the George component. I'm going to move it from main.dart into the onload method of the George component. We could continue to organize the code even beyond this, but I want to leave some level of the George information in the main.dart actually as almost like a hint to see where you need to go. Because if you just read main.dart and there's almost nothing in there, it may be difficult to figure out quite like what's going on with the size of George and the position. So in the George component, create an onload method. It's similar to the one that's in the FlameGame, and we're going to load the animations in the onload method that is specific to the George component. So when the George component is loaded, we will, I missed the F here. We're going to load up the animations here. So first we have to access the sprite sheet from the local storage. And after we load the sprite sheet, so remember it's an async await, then we can start building the animations. So all of those variables we're going to put into George, all the animation variables. So just remember that the sprite animation component has a property called animation, and that's how we're changing the animation of George in the 4 directions plus his idle state. There's a red squiggly line under the images because I think that's actually in the package flame/flame.dart, which likely we didn't import at this stage. At this stage, I'm still going to cut the animation speed out from the main.dart file and just drop it in as a variable into the George component file. We can also pass it in from a constructor, but I think at this stage, let's just leave it in here as this double speed. And then in main.dart, we did set the initial animation as the idle animation, but we can move that into the George component as well. There are different ways to do it, but I think I'll just put it in the onload method. That might be the easiest thing. This is future Craig. Codebaker 1 was going through the tutorial and it didn't work for her. So she had an error where the animation idle might have, it wasn't being loaded. So there is likely some problem in the tutorial. You might have to put this animation equals idle here. So after you define the different animations and then do the onload. Okay, it's looking pretty good. I still didn't solve that images issue. I just realized that it's actually the method from the instance of the myGeorge game. So we're gonna use the mixin has game ref on this component so that we can access the specific instance of the myGeorge game. And then import, we can then load the image into the FlameGame from here. Okay, let's reload George and see whether George is still going around town making friends in the beautiful village of Happy Bay Village, where George has just moved into. I think I'll set up some baked goods, so oftentimes when you meet your neighbors, you do bring cookies or some type of pie over, which would be perfect for the code bakers here. So there's several different options for the bakery assets. There's this one, which is name your price. So basically anyone watching the tutorial could get some of these. It doesn't actually match the art style. However, it's more accessible, right, to anyone watching the tutorial. So I think I'm going to use this one. Personally, I don't mind paying for these great art. This one is $5. And the style does maybe match. There's a lot more we can do, including adding some icons or other assets onto the game. We'll also get to the point where we are constructing our own original game map. Remember that the current map we're using is a demo map from the Lime Zoo on itch.io. And the George sprite sheet was made by user Sheep on OpenGameArt. So subscribe to the channel and we will update this thing unless my #1 code baker, my daughter, unless she revolts, in which case we'll move on. But at this point, we're making some progress, so I think I'll keep to this one.